Hello, and welcome to Politics UK. Legend has it that F. Scott Fitzgerald once told his friend and fellow author Ernest Hemingway, "The rich are different from you and me," only for Hemingway to reply, "Yes, they have more money." Some things don't change. The rich still have more money than the rest of us. Only now they're the super rich. And instead of keeping hold of their money, a new generation of self-made entrepreneurs has started to use its wealth for philanthropic purposes.
It's not all of the new rich that are not selfish, champagne-swilling swine, obviously, but there is a growing trend that as you make some money yourself, you have more money than you really know what to do with, and you think, what am I going to do with this money?
Matthew Bishop, the American business editor of The Economist magazine, and the man credited with coining the phrase philanthro-capitalist.
Well, I think the thing about philanthropists, rather than the rest of us who are just giving to charity, is that they have the ability to marshal resources on a grand scale, and that gives them the ability to really take a problem, figure out the underlying causes, and try and take a strategic long-term approach to solving a problem rather than just alleviating the symptoms, which is what a lot of other charity too often does.
What will the emergence of philanthro-capitalists mean for traditional charities?
A lot of the new philanthropists, the philanthrocapitalists, are actually working with existing charities. And I think they are both learning quite a lot about each other. The philanthrocapitalists have often come in with a rather simple view that they can just arrive and demand results and action and that everything will be solved quickly. And they're finding out that problems are much more difficult than before, whereas the traditional charities are used to dealing with relatively small donors or with governments, and they're not used to dealing with these demanding business types who are really pushing them. So they're both figuring out how to make it work. But I think in the long run, it'll be good for both, that you'll get the expertise and reach of the traditional charities working with the motivational drive and the funds of the new philanthrocapitalists.
You don't hear much about the super rich here at Westminster, unless they've become embroiled in bankrolling political parties. Gordon Brown's recent difficulties were caused, in part, by tax measures widely seen as penalising the poor. This week's warning from the Governor of the Bank of England that the nice decade, as he called it, was over and that we should brace ourselves for a bumpy economic ride won't have inspired confidence in middle-class homeowners fearful of a property crash and already complaining about rising food and energy bills. It all seemed so different at the start of the nice decade.
Give your all. Make this the giving age.
Tony Blair preparing to lead his party and the rest of the country onto the sunlit uplands of a place he called New Britain. The giving age seemed to pass most people by. Household wealth increased during the Blair years. Donations to charity did not. The proportion of national income given to charity has fallen over the past 15 years. No wonder some charities are now looking to see if the new super-rich will emulate their Victorian predecessors and usher in a new age of philanthropy. Walk around the centre of most British towns and cities and you'll soon encounter the physical legacy of the Victorian philanthropists. Not far from the Palace of Westminster is the world-famous Tate Britain Art Gallery, established by the sugar merchant Henry Tate. But in modern times, it's been wealthy Americans who've led the way when it comes to charitable giving. I suggested to Matthew Bishop that the growth of British philanthropy was just another aspect of Americanisation.
I think there's a bit of Americanisation in it, but I think that can easily be exaggerated because if you look at the history of Britain, for example, Britain really invented modern philanthropy back in the Tudor periods when they invented the charitable trust for the first time. In the Victorian era, the new wealthy of the Industrial Revolution were expected to be philanthropists, and it was an extraordinary golden age of philanthropy. So I think in some ways, every time you see a period of great wealth creation, you tend to see a golden age of philanthropy, and Britain is part of a global wealth creation boom, and so I think it's also part of what is becoming a global philanthropy boom.
Aha, the G word. G is for global and for globalisation. The collapse of communism at the end of the 20th century and the globalised capitalist economy that's developed ever since created new entrepreneurs and gave the old ones new worlds to conquer.
The wealthy now play on an international stage.
Ben Morton-Wright, the Chief Executive Officer of Global Philanthropic, an international consultancy which helps non-profit organisations get the resources they need and which advises super-rich individuals on how to give their money away.
They make their wealth, whether they're writing books and selling them around the world or whether they're pop stars or football stars. The reality is now that they're not just creating wealth in their own community or their own country, they're doing it globally. So they become global assets and they're making phenomenal wealth because of that. I think it's a very new phenomenon and it does absolutely relate to globalisation and the development of a very different economic environment that we live in.
The Victorians would build schools and libraries in their hometowns and countries. The new super-rich think globally when they're making their fortunes and think globally when they're giving. Ben Wright again.
I think increasingly you're seeing the super-rich looking at issues-based philanthropy where they're tackling the world issues, whether it be malaria or HIV, and they're getting together and they're putting billions of their own money to these big causes, and they're working actually in many ways together to help solve some of the big problems of the world.
The Scottish-born US steel millionaire Andrew Carnegie is the model for the modern philanthropist. He built 2,500 libraries around the world, paid for medical research that developed insulin for mass production, and declared that the man who dies rich dies disgraced. Carnegie was a self-made millionaire. A generation ago, the majority of individuals featuring on lists of Britain's super wealthy had inherited their money. Now the lists are dominated by self-made entrepreneurs. And it is this shift which many people are crediting for the new philanthropy. Mark Evans is head of family business and philanthropy at Coutts & Co. Bankers to the Queen, as well as to business tycoons, landed gentry, sportsmen and women, and famous actors. Which group, I asked, was most likely to produce philanthropists?
It does cut across a lot of the client groups, but I think if there's one group in particular, it would be the entrepreneurs group. And typically, it will be when somebody is selling their business that they put some money aside and they start the process of considering how to create an effective giving strategy.
So why do you think entrepreneurs are the people who are most likely to get involved?
A lot of entrepreneurs, of course, are self-made, and so they have seen how difficult life can be. And I think that it's for that reason, if none else, that a lot of entrepreneurs want to make a difference to people that haven't perhaps had the same combination of opportunity and luck as they have had. And so it's that tie back to where they came from that really drives them to want to make a difference.